Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of the Israel Journey, your class on Jewish history. I'm your host, Rabbi Ari Enkin, coming to you live this evening from Beit Shemesh, Israel. As we do each and every class, please sign in. Let me know where you're listening in from this evening, and let me know that you hear me okay and you see our first slide, and we'll get going in just a moment. Welcome, Mary. And welcome, Todor. I guess everyone hears me. I guess Mary's in Iowa and Todor's in Bulgaria. I guess that means we got worldwide connection over here. Nico, welcome. William, North Carolina, welcome. Hungary is on the line. Great to have you. Mike, welcome. Okay, it seems that everybody can hear me okay and see the first slide okay. We'll just let a few slowpokes catch in right now. I see some people logging in as I speak, a good number logging as I speak. We'll give them another 30 seconds or so, and then we're going to hit the road running and learn about Ashkenazi Jewry. Stay tuned. 20 seconds. Come on, slowpokes, get in there already. Okay. I think we're ready to go. As mentioned, this evening's class gets us into Ashkenazi Jewry. For quite a while, as you know, we've been speaking about Sephardic Jewry, particularly Spanish and Portuguese. So we're going to go over now to the west. Well, I guess that's not really, I guess we're going east. We're still in Western Europe. I apologize. That wasn't exact. West is more the Sephardi territory, but we're moving a little bit towards east to Ashkenazi territory. That's what I should have said. You'll see over here a cute map on your screen that I found, and it basically circles where, primary bodies of Jewish communities came from. You see a big red circle over Eastern Europe, parts of Western Europe. It's a kid's map, so it's not exactly 100% accurate, but you can see the word Ashkenazi covering a big swath of Eastern Europe. You see the green circle that is the Sephardic lands, Spain and Portugal, primarily Morocco. You see another category of Jews that is lesser known, or at least the term is lesser used, and that's called Mizrahi. You'll see the Mizrahi circle covers most of the Middle East. So the truth is, what you see on your screen, Jews from those areas are truly officially known as Mizrahi Jews, but for various reasons, they've been grouped together with the Sephardim Jews, and they too are generally known as Sephardi, even though that's not completely accurate. You have in Africa, you see very clearly the blue circle, Ethiopian Jews. Well, that's a no-brainer. They come from Ethiopia. The India, you see a circle over there. That is called the B'nai Yisrael community, and they are their own unique community, the Jews of India, which we may actually deal with in its own class. We'll deal with those Jews another time. But we're going to emphasize this evening the Ashkenazi Jews. And Ashkenazi is a term that refers to Jews, Jewish communities that began in the Holy Roman Empire. The traditional language of Ashkenazi Jews has always been Yiddish. Next week, ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We are going to have an entire class on Yiddish and Ashkenazi foods. So you're already mouth-watering, I hope, for next week's class. Next week, Yiddish and Ashkenazi foods. Now, these Ashkenazi Jews established communities throughout Central and Eastern Europe, which had been their primary region of concentration until recent times. Ashkenazim, as I quote, made quite a disproportionate and remarkable contribution to humanity, says Eric Hobsbawm, noted historian. Jewish communities of Europe contributed to all fields of discipline and arts, philosophy, scholarship, literature, music, science, you name it. But of course, the Holocaust came and completely devastated Ashkenazi Jewry, Ashkenazi culture, and probably affected every single Ashkenazi family on the planet. There is no Ashkenazi family that didn't have some kind of connection or loss in the Holocaust. It's estimated in the 11th century, Ashkenazi Jews composed only 3% of world Jewry, of the world's Jewish population, while at their peak in 1931, they accounted for 92% of the world's Jews. Immediately prior to the Holocaust, The number of Jews in the world stood at approximately 16 million, and today we have about 15 million Jews, with Ashkenazim making up about 75% of Jews worldwide. How the numbers work, I don't know. I have to confess, I don't know. In fact, a question's been asked with a lot of answers given. Why are there more Ashkenazi Jews in the world than Sephardic Jews when the Holocaust, for example, didn't really affect Sephardic Jewry? Certainly not in the way it affected Ashkenazi Jewry. These are questions that require further scholarship, further research. We're not going to get into them this evening. We're just going to focus on the Ashkenazi culture, Ashkenazi customs. Just looking at the question box, as I will from time to time, see if any comments or questions are coming in. Nothing yet. Let's go on to our next slide. The name Ashkenazi, believe it or not, is actually biblical in nature. There's a guy in the Bible named Ashkenaz. Yeah, Ashkenaz was the son of Gomer, and Gomer was a grandson of Noah. So you see, the Ashkenazi roots are very, very old. Not only does Ashkenazi, or the name Ashkenaz, become the flag for Jews of Eastern Europe and parts of Western Europe, Ashkenazim, and the word Ashkenaz is associated very closely with Germany. We'll get into that more in a moment. But also, the forerunner of the man Ashkenaz, the fellow Gomer, who I mentioned a moment ago, Gomer himself, the grandson of Noah, is already associated with Germany in the Talmud. Germany is mentioned in the Talmud. So that's how old a Jewish connection to that part of the world really is. And you can see that's how we got the name Ashkenazim from Gomer and Ashkenaz. Sometime in the early medieval period, the Jews of Central and Eastern Europe came to be called by this term, Ashkenazim or Ashkenazi. In conformity with the custom of designating areas of Jewish settlement with biblical names, as Jews have done throughout history, Spain, for example, was called Sfard. It is called Sfard to this very day. Remember, Jews from Spain are called Sephardic Jews. Well, the word Sfard, that's today it means Spain, is found in the Bible, in the book of Obadiah. Even France is found in the Bible. It's called Sarfat. Even today in Israel, in modern day Hebrew, France is known as Sarfat. So that has always been a Jewish thing, is to try and name Jewish communities with biblical precedents. Of course, here in the state of Israel, whenever a new community is founded, whether it's a modern city or, of course, even an ancient archaeological site, much effort is made to determine where this city was in biblical Israel. For example, we're broadcasting live from Beit Shemesh. When this Beit Shemesh was founded 50-some years ago, it was called Beit Shemesh because we realized it's built upon the biblical land of Beit Shemesh, and so on and so forth for all the cities around Israel. Biblical maps are always consulted before a city is named in order to determine and continue the ancient name. And even more so amongst the global communities outside of the land of Israel, as we saw, Sephardi is not new. It's not from the Spanish Inquisition. It's from the Bible. Ashkenaz is from the Bible, etc., etc. History tells us we have records of Jewish communities in Southern Europe since pre-Christian times. And of course, many Jews were denied full Roman citizenship until 212, when the Emperor Caracalla granted all people citizenship. Jews were required to pay a poll, a tax, until the reign of Emperor Julian in 363, and in the late Roman Empire, Jews were free to form networks of cultural and religious ties and enter into various occupations, anything they wanted. But after Christianity became the official religion, it went downhill for Jews, as it often had under Jewish rule, under Christian rule. Just getting a note over here that someone doesn't see their slide. I can confirm it's not on my end. It must be on your end. Okay. Fine, you see over here a book. I gave you a picture of a book in the slide, a very well-known book, The World That Was, all about Ashkenaz, particularly German Jewry from the years 800 till about our modern day. And that's a book that's very popular and it's available for those who want to learn more about Ashkenazi Jewry. Let's go on to our next slide. Okay, now that we spoke about the general origins of Ashkenazi Jewry, we're going to focus on a couple of communities today. Of course, Germany, because Germany is a primary country associated with Ashkenazi Jews. So we're going to talk a little bit about Jewish life in Germany and particularly how the Jews got along with the non-Jews in ancient Germany. Okay? Okay, let's get at it. At first, in Germany, Jews lived primarily in their own quarter of major towns. They lived in the Jewish quarter. Not really a ghetto. Ghettos came much later, but there was always a Jewish community. And in fact, throughout history, Jews always lived together. In fact, Jews, according to Jewish law, essentially must live together. I'll give you but one example. In Jewish law, as you might know, it's forbidden for a Jew to drive to the synagogue on Shabbat. On Saturdays, Orthodox Jews do not drive. Well, if you can't drive to the synagogue on Shabbat, and you've got to be at the synagogue on Shabbat, that means you've got to live near the synagogue so you can be there on Shabbat without a car or horse and buggy or whatever method of transportation you have in your day and age. So Jews always lived together because they had to be near the synagogue. And when you're near the synagogue, well, you have other Jewish outlets as well, the bakery, the butcher, all in the area of the synagogue. So the synagogue united communities, and a synagogue was the landmark of where any Jewish community would surround themselves, where they would concentrate, where they would live. So in Germany, ancient Germany, this was no different, and the Jews had their own neighborhoods, not ghettos, not yet. In Frankfurt, for example, the Jewish section of town was known as the Judengasse, the Jewish street, Judengasse, while in England, there was Little Jew Lane in Oxford and Jewbury in York. So the Jews had their communities, and as you see, the non-Jewish communities called it the Jewish community. At that time, in this early German Jewish life, Jews were in constant daily contact with their non-Jewish neighbors. They would interact with the nobility, with the merchants, the peasants, all of society, the entire community. Jews, Gentiles would work together. Jews would hire non-Jews for all sorts of labor, skilled labor, unskilled labor. There would be buying and selling between the two groups, especially things that Jews themselves did not produce, like wood, bricks, paints. These things were in the non-Jewish market. Jews would purchase all their needs from the non-Jews. Furthermore, for example, when a fire would threaten the town, a frequent occurrence in those days, Jews and non-Jews worked together to extinguish the fire. In the olden days, a fire usually meant the end of the entire community. Yes, the entire community. They didn't have fire trucks like we have today and other efficient putting out the fire methods. So when there was a fire in any part of the town, it was the entire town's business. The entire town had to get together to help each other put the fire out. So non-Jews and Jews would work together in the success of their community. In all, despite the lack of relationships between German Jews and non-Jews on the social and intellectual levels, there was considerable interaction between them economically in the business world. And of course, this is not something that was just in Germany, but Jews are always warned, cautioned, encouraged to limit social interaction with non-Jews. And that's simply because intermarriage is a very, very big sin, to put it lightly. It's considered to be a very, very bad thing in Jewish life for a Jew and non-Jew to intermarry, and therefore social interactions between the sexes was very limited, if at all. But in the business world, the formal, professional, we were able to distinguish ourselves and separate the two worlds. There was never usually a problem. But again, on the social level, there was minimal contact, but for a very good reason. More community cooperation included the judge. Okay, there was a government-appointed judge for the Jews. And this government-appointed judge for the Jews would handle any legal dispute that came between Jews and non-Jews. At times, there was even a mixed court in ancient Germany consisting of 2 Jews appointed by the community and 2 non-Jews appointed by the town council. Okay, towards the end of the 15th century, regular municipal courts assumed this function as non-Jewish merchants falsely accuse the Jews judge of taking bribes. That is the advent of 20th century, 19th century anti-Semitism in Germany, where the Jews are accused of all the problems in the country, of the corruption, etc., etc. That was the fuel that began Hitler's fire. One thing about courts is I'm being asked the question now, what about Jews and Jews? Where did they go to court? We spoke about Jews and Gentiles. Well, the answer is that according to Jewish law, we have our own courts. Judaism has a legal system, civil and monetary law, and two Jews that have a dispute are required to go to a Jewish court known as a Beit Din. Every major Jewish community today has a Beit Din and get their monetary dispute worked out according to Jewish law. Two Jews are not allowed to go to secular courts and have their problem worked out according to secular law because the Torah has a solution for everything, and we believe we should use our own tradition to solve problems. We don't need any other tradition, any other legal system. Okay? Questions, comments? Nothing coming in at this time. We're going to go on to our next slide. We're going to talk a little bit about Jewish life in Greece and Jewish life in Italy. The history of the Jews in Greece goes back to at least the archaic era of Greece, when the classical culture of Greece was undergoing a process of formalization after the Greek Dark Age. The Greek historian Herodotus knew Jews, and he would call them the Palestinian Syrians. He would list the Jews among the Levite naval forces in the service of the invading Persians. While Jewish monotheism was not deeply affected by Greek polytheism, the Greek way of living was attractive, especially for the wealthier Jews. And unfortunately, there was a lot of intermarriage and Hellenization of Jews. And in fact, in 10 days from now or less, we'll be celebrating Hanukkah. In about 10 days or less, we'll be celebrating Hanukkah, which celebrates the Jewish victory over the Syrian Greeks. Not to be confused with the Greeks of today. It's not exactly the same nation, but the Greek culture of Hellenization, the Greek history, is something we celebrate that we conquered, that we were able to keep our traditions as Jews and not be assimilated or intermarry with the Syrian Greeks. Okay? Nevertheless, once we're on the topic, I'll just briefly tell you one example of differences between Jewish culture and Hellenistic culture, and that was Judaism emphasizes the soul, while ancient Greek culture emphasized the body, right? The Olympics, all the games of Greece, and there's a lot of immorality involved in those games. Very often the games were played without clothes on. So Judaism, again, emphasized the soul, God, service of God, performance of commandments and prayer, while Greeks worship the body. But you know what? Here's the bottom line. You need balance. You need both. That's a very important lesson. We shouldn't think that one culture has it all without anything else to learn from another culture. Judaism teaches that we have to balance the pursuit of health of the soul with health of the body. So anyone who believes that taking care of the body is not a Jewish thing is wrong. Proper diet, exercise, very Jewish things. But worship of the body, that's not Jewish. That was the ancient Hellenistic culture, the ancient Greeks, and they ain't here today, so obviously they did something wrong. Okay, let's talk about the synagogue in the Agora of Athens. There's a synagogue there built in 267 CE. The Stobi synagogue of Macedonia was built on the ruins of an even more ancient synagogue in the 4th century. In the 5th century, there was a synagogue there that was transformed into a Christian basilica. There was also ancient Jewish communities on Crete and Rhodes in the Greek islands, where I was able to visit in 2010, and there are remnants of ancient Jewish communities there as well. As Corfu is another one. We can't forget Corfu. There's a ton to discuss about Jewish life in Corfu, especially the famous, controversial Corfu etrogim. Those lemons we use for Sukkot holiday used to be provided by Corfu. So Jewish life in Greece was very, very rich. Today, it's a very small community, primarily in Athens. And that's the story there. Going to Italy now, turning our attention to Italy. Jews came to Italy during the time of the Roman rule of the land of Israel. After the temple was destroyed, Titus brought successive waves of Jews as prisoners and slaves. I was in Rome last year. I was able to see the Arch of Titus. A considerable number of these Jews subsequently gained their freedom and became the nucleus of many Jewish communities throughout Italy. Strangely enough, despite dwelling in the center of Roman and later Catholic rule, it appears that the Jews of Italy fared better than those of other areas. And for example, a famous Italian Jewish family, the Kalonymus clan, perhaps it could be said that the Kalonymus clan is the father of all Ashkenazi Jewry. This family spans several hundred years. Members of this family wrote numerous poems, literature, liturgy, prayers, which feature prominently in the Ashkenazi prayer book, especially for Yom Kippur. And what else can I tell you about the Italy Jewish communities today? The Italy community is based in Rome, which has a number of functioning synagogues, so it's a very small community, and in Venice probably has a slightly more active community over there. And we'll be speaking about other Ashkenazi communities in the coming weeks as we continue with our section, our unit here on Ashkenazi Jewry. Okay, let's go on to our next slide. Going back to Germany, I want to share with you some of the customs of Germany, of German Jews, which spread to all of Ashkenaz, which is common in many Ashkenazi communities. Well, some are not practical anymore, but give you an idea of how Ashkenazi Jewish life works from a ritual and religious perspective. Back in Worms, and we're going to go to Worms now because that is probably the oldest Jewish community of Ashkenaz, and it is best known as a town where the famous Rabbi Rashi, the famous commentator, spent a good part of his life. Now, a lot of our documentation and records about Jewish life in Worms in Germany come from a fellow from the 1600s named Juspa. Juspa the Shamus, or Juspa the officer, Juspa the sexton. These are words that are used to convey a person who works in the service of the community. So we have a record from a fellow named Juspa, who I don't know much more about other than what I'll share this evening. But again, he seems to be the quoted source for ancient Ashkenazi customs. So clearly, this fellow Juspa was an officer of the community. So he writes that the shamus, also known as the officer of the synagogue sexton, the beadle, the gabbai is a word we're going to be using more over here this evening. But this person who was in charge of the community, especially from the synagogue side, was responsible, you ready, for waking people up for morning prayers. That was common in Ashkenazi life in ancient Germany. The synagogue officer would wake everyone up for the morning prayers at 4:30 a.m. How would he do that? He would go with a special hammer and knock on your shutters. He'd knock on your windows. And he'd wake up all the men for prayer, sometimes as early as 4:30 a.m. Can you imagine? Ladies, your husband being woken up at 4:30 a.m., that probably means you're up too. You probably want to kill this guy who's waking you up. But that was the custom back then. They didn't have alarm clocks. It was the officer of the synagogue who was responsible of getting men out of bed in order to ensure that the morning service could take place. As you know, the morning service cannot take place, at least not in a communal fashion. There's not at least 10 men. So the sexton would go waking up all the men from 4:30 a.m. in the summer when the sun rose very early, and that could be as late as 8 a.m. depending on where you were in Europe in the winter. And not only would he bang on the windows, he'd yell, "Shul, shul, come to pray, come to the synagogue." This was done every single day of the year, regardless of the weather. Another duty of the synagogue officer was to maintain a communal oven in his house. This is actually quite cool. Not everyone had an oven back then. Very few people would have an oven. The synagogue officer would be one of those people to have an oven. And on Shabbat, as you know, and you'll find out more next week, we eat the cholent, the special Shabbat stew. But if you don't have an oven, how are you going to make stew? So the ladies would make the cholent, the stew, at home Friday afternoon and bring it to the officer's home to put it in his oven so that it would cook overnight and be ready for the Shabbat lunch meal after services Saturday morning. Pretty cool, huh? Imagine going to your neighbor's house, or everyone going to the neighbor's house, to bring their pot before Shabbat, getting it again after services to go have the Shabbat meal. The baker's shop, by the way, was another place that people would use to bring their pots for Shabbat. And the baker's oven, again, would be used by the community on Shabbat for the cholent. Okay, we're moving on to the next slide. We have some more customs of Ashkenazi Jewry. We're going to talk about the rabbi's duties and more about the synagogue officer, who you see is called the Gabbai. And that's the word used today, Gabbai, in Ashkenazi congregations. In fact, in most Sephardi congregations, the word Gabbai is used as well. Now, the rabbi's duties back in Ashkenaz was to punish or fine the bad members of the community. We don't do that much anymore. The rabbi doesn't really ban people. The Jewish courts sometimes do that if it's needed, but back then it was the community rabbi who would excommunicate people, fine people, ostracize people who deserved this type of thing. And again, this was done in the synagogue. This type of ban proceedings were done in the synagogue. Today, however, as mentioned, much less so. As is customary today, the rabbi would deliver special sermons on Shabbat. Interesting note over here is that although common custom almost worldwide is for the rabbi to deliver a sermon every single Shabbat, it wasn't always that way. Really, originally, I should say, the rabbi would deliver a sermon only twice a year, on the Shabbat before Passover, in order to teach people how to prepare for Passover, and the Shabbat before Yom Kippur, in order to stir everyone's heart to repent, to prepare for the Holy Day of Atonement. But very, very early on, it became customary for the rabbi to give a sermon every single Shabbat. The rabbi was given a home and generally exempt from community taxes. That continues today in many communities as well. The rabbi sits in a special seat, in a distinguished seat in the synagogue, so everyone would know clearly who the rabbi is. Where there were smaller towns located outside the big towns, the rabbi of the big town was also generally the acting rabbi for the small towns as well. He would go visit them periodically, maybe a couple times during the year, and spend Shabbat with the community, teaching them, giving the sermons, and the like. So that was from the rabbinical perspective, the leadership perspective, the ritual side of things. But as mentioned, we had the synagogue officer. And community members would select somebody to become the synagogue officer, who is called the Gabbai, or sometimes known as the Parnas. That word is still used today in some Jewish communities, Parnas, but Gabbai is more common, and Gabbai refers to the man responsible for the running of the synagogue, generally from the non-religious side of things. The rabbi, of course, is responsible for the religious running of the synagogue. The Gabbai is generally responsible for the running of much everything else, but some ritual matters are also in the hands of the Gabbai. Okay, interesting custom in ancient Germany was that a boy who turned 13 on Shabbat did not have his bar mitzvah on his birthday. He was having the bar mitzvah the next Shabbat. That was a custom over there. They wanted to be 13 years and 1 day old for the bar mitzvah, but the custom evolved today that if your birthday is on Shabbat, your bar mitzvah is on that Shabbat as well. There's no need to wait till the next day. There's no need to wait until the next Shabbat. Any questions now on Jewish communal life, the rabbi's role, the gabbai's role, synagogue life? If you have any questions on that, now is the time to ask. I'll give you a minute or two. We'll see if anyone's typing questions into the box, and then we'll move on to our next slide. Okay, I guess there's no questions coming in. A very intuitive bunch. You are this evening listening closely and learning. Thank you. I guess that's good too. Let's go on to our next slide. More about community life in Ashkenaz. We have also from that Juspa, his records, his documentation, engagement, marriage, circumcision, all these things were part of the everyday life of Jews, a struggle for survival, and there were always occasional persecutions. Nevertheless, it appears that the Jews of Worms were somewhat financially secure and comfortable. A bridegroom would send gifts to his bride, banquets, and feasts were abundant in Jewish life in ancient Germany. There's always a reason to celebrate, whether it's a bris, circumcision, or even 8 days earlier, the birth, or a girl birth, a girl bat mitzvah, bar mitzvah, wedding, pre-wedding, post-wedding. Jews always have an excuse to eat, and ancient Germany was no different. And generally, the entire community was invited to these affairs. Juspa also records the rare occasions when individuals would transgress the law. For example, a Kohen, a priest who was a Sabbath desecrator, was not permitted to perform the priestly blessing. There's also talk of rabbinic bans on playing cards or dice, other games that are considered to be a waste of time or even bordering on gambling, which is generally frowned upon in Jewish law and the Jewish community. Hanukkah, however, and once more, we have a reference to Hanukkah here, and it's worth going into it for a moment because we have Hanukkah next week, in 10 days or so. But playing cards and chess was a very big popular pastime over Hanukkah throughout Ashkenazi Jewish communities. Even though it was banned, it was frowned upon the rest of the year, it was essentially loosened, the ban, and cards and dice and these types of games were played on Hanukkah. Why? Simple. The rabbis wanted the kids and the mischievous teenagers to sit by the Hanukkah candles. So Hanukkah candles are lit at, let's say, 4 or 5 p.m., but the rabbis didn't want the people just lighting and running. We want you lighting and staying, lighting and seeing the candles, enjoying their light, remembering the miracles, praising God. And one way to get people staying home around the table near the candles was to let them play chess and cards and all the like. Okay, moving right along. Honesty was a very important attribute in Ashkenaz, and Jews were expected to go far above and beyond the law in honesty and decency in business, because a Jew who's supposed to be a light unto the nations, a Jew who observes the Torah, has to be far away from any suspicion and was expected to conduct himself in a 110% manner, not merely a 100% manner. Modest dress was very important. We didn't want any immodest dress, not for promiscuous purposes or to attract unwanted attention. These were important attributes in the Jewish community. So finally, wrapping up Worms, we see that it was a very close-knit, peaceful community, very vibrant, active, somewhat well-off, at good peace with its neighbors, maintained many customs. This went on for hundreds of years, essentially until the Crusades, when the Crusades came and knocked out communities all throughout Europe. But until then, the Jews were able to develop both spiritually and materially in the exile of Germany. Let's go on to our next slide. A quick word about Ashkenazim and Kabbalah. Everyone likes to hear about Kabbalah. The study of Kabbalah became popular among Ashkenazi scholars in the Middle Ages, particularly in Germany. For example, a well-known personality, a Kabbalistic mystical personality of the 12th century, was Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid. Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid wrote a book called Sefer Hasidim, the Book of the Pious, which is a beautiful merge of halacha and Kabbalah, Jewish law, and mystical teachings. The book was very, very popular right from its start. There's hardly a home or synagogue without a copy. And Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid had many enactments that he made in his lifetime. He added many new enactments in Jewish law. Some of them are frankly quite bizarre. One of his most famous enactments is that enemies may not be buried in the same row of a cemetery. And so too, a man should not marry a woman who has the same name as his mother. And that indeed is pretty much law today. That's the Ashkenazi custom today. If you don't marry a woman who has the same name as your mother. And there's many reasons for the enactments that Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid made. We're not going to get into them now. Maybe we'll have a class on them another time. But definitely made his mark. Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid is a personality you have to know if you're going to know anything about the formative years of Ashkenazi Jewry and the mixing of Kabbalah and Halacha and many enactments. Give you another one. I'll share with you one other one. Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid writes that if you renovate your home, you cannot change the positions of where doorways and windows were before the renovations took place. If you want to remodel your house, that's fine, but make sure you don't close up windows where there were windows or close up doorways where there were doorways. Why? Because Rabbi Yehuda Chassid teaches that among us are all kinds of ghosts and demons. And these demons are used to passing through certain doorways and certain windows, and they get quite grouchy if you change their route, and they can cause damage to the family in the house. That's what he writes. I'm not saying I believe it. I'm not saying you have to believe it, but that's what he writes. And common custom is to endeavor to comply with that, and those who are making renovations to their homes might want to consider not upsetting those ghosts. That's Kabbalah for you, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go on to our next slide. Now that we're talking about a major personality, we're going to go on to another major personality right now and talk about him in a bit more detail. He's somewhat similar to Rabbi Yehuda Chassid in terms of his contributions to Ashkenazi life. This is Rabbi or Rabbeinu Gershom. Rabbeinu Gershom is a famous, fundamental personality who helped form Ashkenazi Jewry. He was one of the great leaders of both French Jews, and German Jews. Okay, so he was born somewhere in northeastern France, but he sometime made his way to Mainz in Germany. As you see on your map over there, you can find where Mainz is today in Germany. And it's not clear precisely when, how, or why he moved to Mainz, but according to what appears to be a tradition, a reliable source, he may have gone to Mainz in order to join his friend, Rabbi Shimon, who is also known as Rabbi Shimon HaGadol, Rabbi Shimon the Great. Could be he wanted to go study with him, be a member of his community. And in Mainz, when Rabbi Gershom settled there, he studied under Rabbi Yehuda ben Meir. Okay, after the death of Rabbi Yehuda ben Meir, Rabbeinu Gershom became the head of the yeshiva in Mainz. He was the greatest scholar in town. He took over the yeshiva. He took over the Talmudic Academy. His fame grew, and people came throughout Europe to Germany just to be able to study with Rabbeinu Gershom. Rabbeinu Gershom and his students formed the beginning of what would be a great flowering and era, a new dawn of Torah study in the regions of France and Germany. And the great French sage, as we mentioned earlier, Rashi, who authored the commentaries, the most fundamental commentaries on all of the Bible and all of the Talmud, he was a student of Rabbi Gershom's students. That gives you an idea of how great Rabbi Gershom was. If Rashi, who we know was so great, Rashi is a household name, he was a student of Rabbeinu Gershom. So Rabbeinu Gershom was huge stuff. In his writings, Rashi writes about Rabbeinu Gershom as, "May the memory of the righteous and the holy be a blessing. He enlightened the eyes of the exile, and from whose mouth we all live. All the exiles of Europe are the students of his students." That tells you what kind of mark Rabbeinu Gershom made on Ashkenazi Jewry. And in fact, Rabbeinu Gershom can be called the father and founder of all Ashkenazi scholarship, and that's why Rabbeinu Gershom is also known as Rabbeinu Gershom Meor Hagola, Rabbeinu Gershom who lit up the exile, who lit up the diaspora. A little bit more on Rabbeinu Gershom on our next slide. Like Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, Rabbeinu Gershom also made many enactments, and yes, some of them were bizarre as well. Rabbeinu Gershom became the leading Jewish authority of his time, and his fame and authority spread throughout France and Germany. He authored many responsa. He answered many questions on Jewish law that came in from all over the world, and even corrected the Talmud where fixing was needed. He authored an extensive commentary on the Talmud, but sadly, most of his commentary was lost, though extensive portions of it were incorporated into a commentary that was compiled by his yeshiva in Mainz. This commentary today is printed in most standard prints of the Talmud and is referred to as a commentary of Rabbeinu Gershom. In fact, at the back of the Talmud, there are many commentaries of great sages who lived throughout history, whose comments are printed today standard in all editions of the Talmud. But perhaps and most significantly, Rabbeinu Gershom was responsible for the institution of several major ordinances, several major enactments, which were accepted as binding by all of Ashkenazi Jews to this very day. The best known of Rabbeinu Gershom's enactments is the enactment forbidding polygamy, marriage with more than one woman. You ever think about it? According to Torah law, there's nothing wrong with it. In fact, many people throughout the Torah had more than one wife. But Rabbeinu Gershom put an end to it because it was uncommon, it was frowned upon in the non-Jewish world, and the Jews are not supposed to do anything that would, breed suspicion or cause others to look down upon them, even if it is fundamentally permissible. Even though it's permissible, you don't have to do it. So Rabbeinu Gershom was very adamant that polygamy must stop. He was very adamant that polygamy must stop, but, point of interest, Sephardic Jews never accepted Rabbeinu Gershom's enactments. And Sephardic Jews today, in Sephardic lands, often have more than one wife, especially in Yemen. Jews in Yemen very often had more than one wife up until this very day. Because again, Rabbeinu Gershom's enactments were not accepted by Sephardic Jewry, only Ashkenazi Jewry. Okay, some of the other enactments of Rabbeinu Gershom include eliminating the husband's right to divorce his wife without her consent. That's right. According to biblical law, a husband may divorce his wife against her will. That was eliminated. A divorce is only legitimate. It only takes effect if both parties agree to the divorce. Another famous enactment of Rabbeinu Gershom is the prohibition on reading another person's mail or private papers, considered to be a very big transgression, a very big breach of Ashkenazi ethics and morals to read another person's mail. Another enactment is forbidding one to remind Jews who are forcibly converted to another religion and then return to Judaism. It's forbidden to remind them about their past. You're not allowed to taunt somebody about sins they committed in the past. And there are many more, ladies and gentlemen, many more enactments of Rabbeinu Gershom. The enactments of Rabbeinu Yehuda HaChassid that we learned in the previous slide and Rabbeinu Gershom are frankly quite fascinating. Some of them do apply today, some of them don't apply today for various reasons. A very fascinating topic, worth a class on its own. Maybe we'll do that someday. But Rabbeinu Gershom ultimately lived in a very difficult period for the Jews. There were many Jews who were forcibly converted to Christianity during this time, including Rabbeinu Gershom's only son, who passed away before he was able to return to Judaism. Some sources mention Rabbeinu Gershom's wife also converted to Christianity. In the year 1012, King Heinrich II issued an edict of expulsion against the Jews of Spain. Yet despite these difficult circumstances, Rabbeinu Gershom raised a generation of dynamic Torah scholars who led Ashkenazi Jewry to great achievements. Rabbeinu Gershom also authored different liturgical pieces, prayers we have today that are recited around the high holidays. And in fact, in one of these beautiful, heartbreaking poems that's recited before Rosh Hashanah, Rabbeinu Gershom expresses a sentiment which was clearly a guiding principle in his life, and which he conveyed to his students about the importance of living as a loyal Jew. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to stop over here for today for our talk on Ashkenazi Jewry. Next week, come back here and bring all your friends. We're going to go more into Ashkenazi Jewish culture. We're going to focus on the Yiddish language and Ashkenazi Jewish foods. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. But don't go away yet. Before we go off, I'm going to share with you a music video that will leave you maybe a bit dancing as you listen to it, as we end our webinar. I'm going to share with you. No, scratch that. How's this? I'm going to share with you a quick video about Israel. Yeah, let's do that now. We'll do the music video next week. Ladies and gentlemen, sit back, relax, and enjoy the short video about how great this country is, Israel. You all belong here. Make sure you get here. Here's a video to give you a taste, to whet your appetite. Ladies and gentlemen, see you again next week. Shalom ulehitraot. Enjoy the video.